Good morning, and welcome all to the sixth hearing of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission's 2022 annual report cycle. I want to extend my appreciation to our witnesses for joining us today and for all the effort that they put into their testimony. We are certainly looking forward to the discussion. China's emergence in manufacturing and international trade has resulted in it serving a dominant role in global supply chains. As with much of China's economic rise, the Chinese Communist Party has sought to put its finger on the scale in multiple harmful ways, through various subsidies, market access restrictions, and broader strategic moves designed to encourage the localization and concentration of global value chains and supply networks in mainland China. Indeed, today, many of our most critical materials and consumer goods, from pharmaceuticals to rare earths to smartphones and laptops, are sourced almost exclusively from China. Likewise, many other critical supply chains, such as those for semiconductors, run through East Asia. And China's centrality in this increasingly integrated region means that many of our supply networks are closely interconnected with China. With Beijing's increasing aggressiveness and willingness to weaponize its economic position, this concentration of critical U.S. supply chains in and around China's borders presents growing risk to the United States. Obviously, many in government and industry today are increasingly prioritizing efforts to secure critical supply chains. And as we'll hear today, gaining visibility into and a better understanding of these global supply chains is a necessary first step to building resilience. Part of this, of course, includes gaining a better understanding of the multitude of factors that contributed to the concentration of supply chains in East Asia. In addition to certain structural features of China's economy and CCP policies, some Western companies' short-term pursuit of lower cost and increased efficiencies has also encouraged production and supply lines to migrate across the globe. Unfortunately, this shift has often come at the expense of security and economic concerns. And as the past 2 years have made us all painfully aware, complex and far-flung supply chains can be highly vulnerable to disruption. And now, with growing geopolitical threats from authoritarian countries, the U.S. must act urgently to build resilience into our supply chains. As other countries reconsider their own exposure to China's economy, CCP leaders are attaching increased importance to protecting their position in global supply chains. General Secretary Xi himself has stated that China's supply chains cannot be broken at critical moments. Our hearing today will evaluate CCP leaders' strategy and tactics to strengthen supply chain security and assess their impact on the U.S. world economies. We are joined today by an impressive collection of witnesses, and we all look forward to hearing their recommendations. I want to extend a special thanks to Assistant Secretary of Defense Deborah Rosenblum for her time later today. Her team at the Office of Industrial Base Policy plays a crucial role in ensuring that the Defense Department has an industrial base that is always prepared to support its critical mission. I'd also like to extend my appreciation to the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee for securing this room for our use today. Before turning to introduction of the witnesses, I want to turn the floor over to my colleague and co-chair for this hearing, Commissioner Bob Borokoff.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the sixth hearing of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission's 2022 annual report cycle. And I want to thank you again to our witnesses for joining us today and for their invaluable testimony. This hearing comes at a pivotal moment as global supply chains continue to face disruptions and affect everything from parts for your dishwasher to microchips used to manufacture new automobiles to the military supply of anti-aircraft missiles. It's not a secret that American families and businesses are experiencing firsthand the consequences of a diminished manufacturing base in the United States, which instead depends on foreign suppliers, including China, for some of the most critical materials and parts. Globalization has lowered costs for consumers through outsourcing production, while also creating more complex and vulnerable supply chains that rely heavily on China. China is now the world's largest manufacturer, and although some companies have relocated their supply lanes to neighboring countries such as Vietnam, businesses are still lured to China by its robust and usually less expensive manufacturing ecosystem. The decrease in homeland manufacturing has diminished the opportunities for businesses, small and large, to innovate new products. And it's hurt the employment opportunities of Americans of all ages, from the apprentice to the semi-retired. As I'm sure we have all experienced, the last several years of lockdowns, port closures, shipping delays have tested the resilience of our supply chains and revealed keen vulnerabilities in how we move goods from supplier to consumer. I personally have worked and owned restaurants and other small businesses for over 4 decades, and I have seen and personally experienced how crucial it is to have strong supply chains in place. Restaurants are the second largest private employers in America. According to the National Restaurant Association's analysis of Bureau and Labor Statistics data, the restaurant industry currently employs 15 million Americans directly, and it represents 1 in 10 American workers. Half of these businesses are family-owned, and each and every one of them depends on regular and reliable shipments of supplies, paper goods, replacement parts from everything from air conditioners and fryers to cash registers and forks and knives. Virtually all businesses in America rely in some fashion, either directly or indirectly, on the ability to purchase goods and rely on prompt deliveries, be it by road, rail, sea, or air. Importantly, over-reliance on Chinese manufacturing presents serious national security concerns. For instance, China dominates portions of the supply chain for key materials used in U.S. defense systems, which we'll hear more about from our witnesses today. The U.S. defense industrial base plays a vital role in ensuring our military has everything it needs to be successful in wartime and prepared in peacetime, and cannot afford to have weak supply chains or domestic capacity. As the U.S. continues to respond to the current crisis in Ukraine, U.S. weapons stockpiles need thoughtful attention. A depleted stockpile, in addition to the delayed delivery of defense system parts, has serious effects on the military's operational readiness. The United States must restore its robust manufacturing base at home and judiciously coordinate with allies to build more diverse and secure supply chains. I hope our hearing today can help us identify weaknesses in U.S. supply chains and determine the best approach for restoring U.S. domestic manufacturing capacity in the most important sectors. We're going to start the day with the panel with Mr. John Verwey, East Asia National Security Advisor at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Next, we will hear from Mr. Jean-Peter Klein-Hunts, Project Director for Technology and Geopolitics at the German think tank, and I'm just going to say SNV, I'll let you pronounce it. And I want to say thank you for coming all the way from Germany. Then we'll hear from Kristen Vicasi, Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science and School of Policy and International Affairs at the University of Maine. Finally, we will hear from Mr. Harry Moser, President of the Reshoring Initiative. Thank you all very much for your testimony. The Commission is looking forward to your remarks. I ask all of our witnesses to please keep their remarks to 7 minutes. And now, Mr. Moser.
Thank you for inviting me to testify. My purpose is to demonstrate that reshoring, especially from China, is essential to resilience, is already substantial, and can be further accelerated via industrial policy. Reshoring has announced 1 million jobs in 12 years and can bring back 1 million more. Implementing my proposed government policies to level the playing field will bring the total to 5 million, a 40% increase in manufacturing, and achieve full resilience. China has been the source of 44% of reshoring and is vulnerable now due to the perceived risk of decoupling. The U.S. needs to reshore more from China, while it still is our choice to reshore rather than wait till China is strong enough to decouple. We have a 1.1 trillion goods trade deficit. Appendix 8 shows that our trade deficit is more or less like a developing country rather than the arsenal of democracy. We have trade surpluses, primarily in commodity minerals and agricultural products, and large trade deficits in most high-tech products. The root cause of the problem is that the U.S. manufacturing cost, or FOB price, is not competitive. Appendix 1 shows a survey we did with Plant Moran and shows the companies source primarily, I'd say 70%, based on price. Appendix 2 shows that the Chinese price, on average, is 30% lower than the U.S. price. So there's a huge difference between the two. That's based on 180 cases of China versus the U.S. U.S. is 10, 15% high relative to most developed countries like Germany, Switzerland, and so on. As long as that huge trade differential exists, our trade imbalance and resilience will not significantly improve. Appendix 5 it shows that reshoring is succeeding. We track reshoring plus foreign direct investment, FDI. And when we started in 2010, the sum of those two was about 6,000 manufacturing jobs per year announced to come back. And in 2021, it was 260,000 jobs just in the year. The limiting factor to do even more is workforce availability. Through 2018, reshoring was driven by recognition of the logistical costs and inconvenience of offshoring and by rising offshore wages, especially in China. Since then, the trade war, tariffs, Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, and the increasing risk of decoupling with China have dramatically increased corporate recognition of the risks of corruption and thus their enthusiasm for reshoring. There are two basic reshoring strategies that the country can follow. We believe both should be followed. First is to change perceptions. Companies source primarily based on looking at the price, the FOB price, rather than looking at the total cost of ownership. So Appendix 10 shows that when companies switch from looking at price to looking at total cost, and perhaps to recognize that there might be a 301 tariff in place, that the percentage of wins by the U.S. goes from 8% to 32% to 46%. So just by getting the companies to do the math correctly, to abandon their traditional policies of buying just on the basis of price, we can substantially reduce the trade deficit and achieve resilience. That's perception. You might say reality is leveling the playing field, reduce the actual factory price gap to make more products reshoreable. Otherwise, we will, if we fund the chip foundries, we'll find that if we don't have the assembly of the electronic products here in the States, we'll be dependent on China to buy our chips to produce the electronic devices to ship back to us. That's not a condition we want to be in, very much consistent with what JP's comments suggested. In priority order, we support reshoring, first FDI, nearshoring, and then other friend shoring. Any of those will work. Recommendations for government policy in priority order. First and always, skilled workforce. The biggest problem we have overall is the lack of the quantity and the quality of the tool makers, welders, precision machinists, et cetera, to drive the acceleration. One of the leading causes of that, I believe, Appendix 11, shows that a very common figure that's on Department of Education and labor websites, and it shows income going up with number of degrees, quoted all the time, $1 million more lifetime income based on college degree. And yet they should have in there the income of people who've passed an apprenticeship or have four more credentials. And it turns out that those incomes are equivalent to that of a bachelor's degree, but our own education labor department do not promote that. We'd advocate having apprenticeship loans to get more students to go into apprenticeships, having fewer college loans, immigration of skilled workforce, reduce the value of the U.S. dollar, use MAC, the market access charge, which was also recommended by Clyde Prestowitz in April. Keep immediate expensing of capital equipment to achieve competitive price and delivery. Do not delay because of inflation. There's a lot of concern about inflation today, but about 30% of the goods now imported from China can individually be sourced in the U.S. without inflation if we can convince the companies to act based on total cost. Maybe price goes up 0.1% one time if they act based on price instead. Update the Commerce Department's ACE toolkit. Provide some data on what the real risks are of things like decoupling. For example, a recent Taiwanese population survey concluded that the probability of war with China is somewhere between 7 and 21%. If companies recognize that fact, they'd be more likely to bring their work back. Healthcare costs in the U.S. for a family average $16,000 per year, which is $8 per hour, which is higher than the Chinese average wage. So we're spending more, our companies are spending more on healthcare than the Chinese are spending on wages. We'd say control malpractice and negotiate all pharmaceutical prices. You'd achieve lower healthcare costs, lower inflation, and accelerated reshoring. My written testimony covers 5 or 6 other areas where we think there's opportunities for success, and I appreciate the chance to present to you. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here, and Barry, it's good to see you. As I recall, our first work together was back in 09-10, and I think you were at Obama's inshoring program, probably 2010, 2011. So you've been a advocate and acolyte on reshoring, inshoring for many years, and your testimony is very helpful. I want to go a little farther on it and understand what tool we make recommendations to Congress. I think there's a general agreement there are supply chain risks. How one rates them and what supply chain specifically one wants to secure in some way, is still in debate. But we don't need more reports. We need action. Last year, this commission recommended that Congress look at outbound investment screening to look at what critical supply chain investments were being made in China, and whether, first of all, to get the information because we don't have a 360 view, but also potentially to mitigate or protect, stop, etc. Those investments being made. A proposal like that was introduced in the House and Senate and is now pending in the conference on the USICA competes bill. So I'd like each of your reactions to using that as a tool to help ensure that we do no more harm, the Hippocratic Oath on trade policy. Second, and Harry, I think you can help here because you worked on the ACE toolkit, as I recall, with Department of Commerce. When I talk to companies here that would like to reshore, and I make them aware of your work, TCO, et cetera, they don't feel they have a partner in the U.S. government, a place they can go like you can in other governments where they will help you understand what access to resources, including financing or anything else that might be available. So your views on that. And finally, Harry, the TCO approach, total cost of ownership approach, asks Wall Street to look a little bit beyond today's EBITDA numbers, right? They're looking at life cycle and some other things. What tools like ESG reporting rule that the SEC is involved in, or other approaches could we potentially look at to get TCO to be a more effective tool and integrated into corporate decision-making? So, Harry, do you want to start?
First, on the ACE tool, it was launched, I think, in 2012. I helped them a bit on it, and it was a good tool. It has our material, has other people's material, but it was last updated on 2018, and there's a lot that could be there. Like I suggested, estimates of risks of various kinds, because risks are hard to find.
Is there a place that a small manufacturer that would like to reshore or like to maintain their operations here can go to? I'm not aware of sort of a one-stop shop. Okay.
No, there's no good data, and data would help. The Select USA tried to also go into Reselect USA. Right. And it seems to have forgotten that, and it's back to just FDI. So I recommend that Select USA or another office pick up the mantle for reshoring. Concerning total cost of ownership and tools needed, I've tried to get SAP and Oracle and groups like that to simplify the gathering of the data, the warranty costs, the travel costs, the various kinds, and aggregate them to specific products and specific suppliers so that it'd be easy for the company, for the purchasing person to see those costs and make an easy decision.
Yes, but a follow-up question, as I understand it, SAP and Oracle platforms are very expensive.
Yes.
And so SMEs, more on the small side, they're not using those systems. How would you?
Dynamics. There's a lot. There's everywhere from big to small systems and I've tried to get many of them to do this, and without success. You mentioned ESG. This one of the simplest measures of environmental action would be, where do you make the product and where do you sell it? We did a study of an aluminum die casting, and making it in China and shipping it here has 25% to 50% more environmental impact than just making it here. So I would recommend that the SEC in their ESG guidelines, one of the questions should be, where do you make it, where do you sell it? And that should calculate into some kind of a negative if it's in the wrong direction.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.